There are certain sounds that you never forget, like the sounds of the monitors beeping constantly, the air vents that are humming at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep, even the sound of your own breathing when everything is silent and you're trying not to panic. I had a birth plan typed out, organized. I had talked about it numerous times, but that didn't matter because everything changed 5.5 weeks early when I had an emergency C section with my twins. Welcome to Staying in My Lane podcast, season 3, episode 3. Today, I want to share something with you guys. I want to share the story of having my twins. I've had a lot of questions from people just asking kind of what happened, are they okay? And I thought it would be easier to share my story whether you know me personally or not. So let's begin. I didn't know that half of the things that went wrong in my pregnancy could actually go wrong. As well as my birth, I am definitely a planner, and my plan did not turn out in the way that I expected. This episode is not just a birth story, it's about losing control, watching my babies go into respiratory distress, even respiratory failure, sitting in a hospital room for going on 3.5 to 4 weeks, and realizing that sometimes the strongest thing that you can do is survive in the moment that you never planned for. I thought that I was prepared. I had been taking the supplements, doing my research. I was seeing the specialists, the high-risk doctor, perinatal. My birth plan was written out, very detailed. I had the mindset that everything was going to go right. What I didn't plan for was watching my babies struggle to breathe. I didn't plan for respiratory failure. I didn't plan for feeling my body turn against me. And I did not plan on not seeing my husband for the first few weeks of our twins being here. This is the birth story that I did not expect to tell, but I'm going to tell. We spend our whole lives trying to control outcomes, controlling our bodies, our marriages. However, birth has a way of exposing the illusion that we are in control. 5.5 weeks early with cholestasis, the liver issue in pregnancy, preeclampsia that turned into eclampsia, growth restriction in baby A, and blood clots early on in my pregnancy. I went to my perinatal appointment thinking that I was steering the ship, thinking that it was my last appointment with perinatal, which is the high-risk doctor, and expecting to just go home. I had just grabbed quick lunch. I was eating in the parking lot before I went in because the ultrasound, I wanted to get the babies moving. I wanted to get them stretched out so we can measure them. This is something that I was doing every week to check the fluid levels, see if babies are okay, check their placentas and everything. So there I was sitting in the parking lot of perinatal and eating my lunch. I go in to my appointment and they start the ultrasound, which ultrasounds are not supposed to be painful. They just take the ultrasound probe, put it on your stomach. They're looking for babies, looking for movement, looking to measure everything correctly. And I about jumped off the table. I was having a lot of pain at this point, and I didn't know why. This is not something that I've ever felt prior in any ultrasound. So the ultrasound tech did realize right away that I was in pain. And I did tell her that I was very uncomfortable. So she went and got the doctor. Doctor came to my bedside. We did the ultrasound. I went to the room post ultrasound for my appointment, my official 20-minute appointment with the doctor. At this point, I began having contractions, and they're coming about every 4 to 5 minutes, but then they stop. The nurse comes in, she's verifying the fact that I am having contractions. They're very intense at this point, and I'm turning very pale. The doctor comes in following the nurse as she went to get him, and he asks me if I'm having any more pain besides that pain in my stomach, which I attributed that to normal pregnancy stretching with the twins because I've never had twins before, but I've had 3 C-sections prior, 3 babies, and there's a lot of scar tissue that can build up. So I figured, hey, that's just what it is. It's just coming towards the end of my pregnancy, and I'm just maybe being a little bit dramatic. My plan was to deliver the twins at 36 weeks exactly because of all of my diagnoses with the cholestasis, which is that liver enzymes that rise during pregnancy, was the bile acids, and preeclampsia, which is the high blood pressure. However, it later turned into eclampsia, and I will get to that. And then growth restriction in baby A, which meant that baby A was significantly smaller than baby B, and so they were having to watch that really closely. The doctor tells me I look awful. He asks me all these questions that they have to ask, and I did have a headache. So I answered yes to that question, and obviously having contractions that have kind of been coming and going. He sits me down in the room and looks me straight in the eye and calmly tells me that this is going to change everything if my headache does not go away. His plan was to send me to OB triage in the hospital, which is right across the street. So I go over there and I get admitted and get settled with a bed, and they start monitoring the babies with the NST. That's the fetal monitoring, where they put the bands on your belly and watch the baby's movements and their heartbeats and things like that. The nurse practitioner comes in, the doctor comes in, the midwife comes in, the nurse comes in, and they're asking me all of these questions. They are giving me Benadryl, Toradol, and Tylenol at this point because my headache is worsening. My eyesight's kind of fuzzy and it's very sensitive to light. So the light is turned off and I'm just kind of waiting. They check my cervix. My cervix is still dilated to what it was, it has not changed. They continue to run blood tests to make sure that my liver, my bile acids, and my liver enzymes are not changing. However, none of that was changing. So they were waiting for the on call doctor to get a hold of them. And then they were waiting for the doctor that was coming on at 5 o'clock to be able to make a decision on what we do moving forward, which happened to be my OB. So that made me feel very comfortable. That was the one thing that went right in my birth plan, ironically. Um, so they contact her and she has me admitted upstairs to the maternity ward, a labor and delivery. So they take me upstairs. I go into the labor and delivery room, and my doctor and another doctor that I see in the same clinic both are able to come in and talk to me at separate times and ask me kind of the same questions but a little bit more different because they know my history. They know how I have been in this pregnancy. They know more personal details rather than just meeting me for the first time or, you know, assessing me in a triage. So they ask me these questions. They are explaining the seriousness of, the outcomes that could potentially happen. And we are trying to come up with a plan on if I stay overnight to be monitored, if I'm, going to have some more tests run, or if I'm delivering my babies today. With my pregnancy already being a high risk pregnancy, anyways, it just kind of elevated and escalated the quickness of making these decisions and kind of pressured me into, okay, I really need to assess what's going to happen and what's best for me and the babies at this point. My doctor asks me about my headache. And at this point, my sister in law is there with me because I called her not knowing really what to expect. And the fact that my husband was an hour and a half away, my in laws were an hour and a half away, and my parents were 3 hours away. So I was by myself and I really wanted support, and she's a great support system. So I leaned on her in this moment. She's in the room. The doctor is asking me these questions and, kind of getting a clearer picture of what we are doing to weigh the outcomes. He asks me one last time, how bad is your headache? Has it went away? And remind you, at this point, I've had Benadryl, Toradol, and Tylenol. I cannot drive an hour and a half back home right now. And I was going to be there regardless overnight. So, there's that. And my eyes are really sensitive at this point, and my headache feels very throbbing in the back of my neck and in the back of my head. So I tell him, yes, I have a headache. I began hysterically crying because I'm realizing the seriousness of the situation. He's not smiling. He's not his, joking self that he usually is, or watching him be a little bit lighthearted in the moment when we're talking about the twins in my appointments. Same with my other doctor. She is also somebody who is usually really smiley and very honest about things. And when I saw both of their faces at this point, I'm realizing that this is a lot more serious than what I even expected. And that's when Doctor tells me that I need to contact my husband immediately, and he has 2 hours to get here because we are delivering the boys tonight. I truly remember the exact moment that everything shifted. The headache that would not go away, the burning in my scar that I've had my previous C-sections out of, and the burning that I felt in my stomach, that pain that I was talking about during the ultrasound. The quiet tone in my perinatal doctor's voice and then my OB's voices when they said, if you have a headache, we should deliver. And let me rewind a little bit. When they did the ultrasound, my perinatal doctor had suggested that there may be some stretching from the C section scar, which is that burning that I was feeling, that pain. And that kind of just got pushed to the side because my headache was more the focus at that point with the preeclampsia. But he did contact my OB that was speaking with me about the headache in labor and delivery and, let him know what was going on in the ultrasound, which come to find out, I was not being dramatic. It was not just normal twin pregnancy stretching and cramping. What he had found on the ultrasound was actually my uterus tearing open. I've heard of a uterine rupture before, and I didn't think that it was ever something that would happen to me. And if it did happen, I would know because it would be sharp shooting extreme pain. However, when I started to realize that this cramping had been going on for a couple days, I realized that it probably started over the weekend where I actually had called labor and delivery and I was going to go in, but it was snowing and the roads were kind of crappy. So I did not. I just laid down and I rested and just kind of took care of myself. But I realize now that it was probably my uterus starting to rupture and I had no idea. Uterine ruptures can happen with overstretching of the uterine wall. And when you've had scarring, it can happen, I guess, a little bit easier, especially if you've had C sections, or it does happen more commonly in twin pregnancies, which I did not know. A lot of factors go into that. And with me having, well, this will be my fourth and fifth babies, it does put me at a higher risk of complications, which I did know that, but I didn't think I would have these many complications through my last pregnancy. So it was honestly a little bit overwhelming and exhausting at times. And it was very hard to, kind of process through that there's so many things going wrong at one time. And my health becomes a very big risk factor and puts me at a higher risk of something going wrong with me health wise. And that was a lot to accept and process. So, back to the story on the day that I gave birth to my babies. I am sitting in labor and delivery with my sister in law. My husband is on his way down, which I felt like took forever. It just, time ticked really slow and it just felt like it was dragging on. I was very nervous. The nurses at this point had begun to put my IVs in my arm and my wrist, and they were giving me some IV fluid. The original plan had been to do my steroid shots for the baby's lung developments around 35 weeks. So you have to do it within like 7 days of having, the babies. And so since I was having them at 36 weeks, we were going to wait. However, since I was now having an emergency C-section, they gave me the steroid injection in the labor and delivery maternity room. So I was having that. I had some medicine. I was, having the anesthesiologist come in and meeting with me, getting me prepared for this C-section that I had not planned for. My husband arrives around 9:30-ish, 9:40-ish. I'm not really sure what time. He puts on his scrubs. I am in mine. I'm ready to go. Well, I'm in my gown and my little scrub hat that, you have to cover your hair with. And we are getting ready to go back. During this time, I am peeing like every 5 minutes because I am like sweating. I don't know what it was, if it was like a combination of the Benadryl and everything that I'd had prior, but my anxiety was literally 10 out of 10 at this point, which I've had 3 C-sections. I know what to expect. I know exactly how things are going to go as long as things don't go, wrong. But I knew what to expect. I knew the process. I knew exactly what I was going back for, everything. So for me to have that anxiety and not really be able to control it at that point was a little scary because I was full on panicking. I was asking a ton of questions like I had never had a C-section before. And it was just a really weird feeling. One of the hardest things was prior to walking back to the C section room, I was told that because I needed magnesium sulfate, which is used for preeclampsia, if the early delivery is due to preeclampsia, magnesium sulfate is given to prevent eclampsia seizures in the mother, which I was kind of already at that point. So, however, because I had to have the magnesium sulfate, that meant that I could not see my babies for a full 24 hours after birth because I had to wait that window of making sure that I was not going to have any seizures or strokes postpartum. And that was kind of a hard thing to accept. We will get into that. But the magnesium sulfate made me feel very groggy, very moody, very out of it. I've never been so groggy and moody at the same time to where I felt so off. So, getting back to my story on the C section, my husband and I are walking back with the nurse. We are hand in hand, holding hands, looking at each other. He can tell I'm nervous, I'm sure, because I'm shaking. And I could not stop shaking. I was just terrified this time. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that this was so unplanned and emergent that I didn't really have time to mentally prepare myself. So we get to the door of the C section room, the OR, also known as the operating room. My husband and I kiss, and he waits outside until they get me prepared. I am going back, getting on the table. The anesthesiologist is right there, the nurse is right there. And, the nurse was such a godsend. She really helped me breathe and meditate through getting the spinal. I get on the bed and she grabs my hands. I put my hands kind of around her shoulders. She's hugging me. As I'm leaning forward, the anesthesiologist is getting ready to kind of talk me through the process of the spinal. I just remember really trying to take deep breaths and just imagine a place of like comfort and calm. And, I was grounding myself, trying to remind myself that breathing through the pain is going to get me through it. I remember the nurse rubbing my shoulder and just reminding me to take deep, slow breaths because I feel like if you even move slightly, you know, that could be detrimental to you as well. You can't move during a spinal because they have to go in through your spine. So it just is really overwhelming at this point for me. I remember being very, again, shaky, very nervous. As soon as the spinal is in, my immediate feeling physically is my feet and my legs begin to feel really hot and tingly. And then all of a sudden, this warm feeling just kind of rushes over my body, and I start to become very numb from the feet up to my chest. I lay back, they swing my legs around on the table. The curtain's going up in front of my face, so I cannot see what's going on. They are beginning to put the catheter in, which I don't feel at all. I literally have no feeling at this point. I remember asking the nurse, like, what's going on, and she's telling me that they are, inserting my catheter. They are pinching my stomach to try to see if there's any feeling. I think at one point they put like some cold packs on you to see if you can feel anything, which I could not feel anything. So that was a good thing because you don't want to feel anything during a C section. A couple minutes later, the doctor walks in. She's ready to go. She's asking me if I'm okay. She is coming around to the right side of me, and the anesthesiologist is at my head. The nurse is at my head. There's a whole team of doctors because we did have twins. Each twin had their own team of, medical staff. This included the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit doctors, and nurses, as well as myself having my own medical team. So there was a lot of people in the room. My husband walks in, he comes right to my head and is holding my hand. And when I tell you I have the best, most supportive husband, I truly do mean it because he locked eyes with me and we had eye contact for quite a while because he can definitely tell when I need support and I was very nervous. And so that eye contact, that physical touch from him really helped me to just remind myself to breathe because I was scared. I mean, if we want to be completely transparent, I didn't know what to expect. This is 34 weeks pregnant, and this is an emergency to where I'm having a lot of health issues. My babies are at risk. I'm at risk. And, I just felt really out of control. So having that support was really detrimental to me in that moment. The doctor makes the first incision. She is cutting through 7 layers of skin, fascia, muscle, organs, everything. And that's what they do during a C section. They cut through 7 layers to get to the baby, or in this case, babies. So we go ahead and do that. I start to feel a lot of tugging and pulling inside of my body, a lot of pressure. And the pressure, the best way I can describe it is that the pressure feels like an elephant sitting on your chest for a minute, and then just a lot of pulling and almost like a tug of war feeling inside that somebody's playing tug of war with a rope or something. All of a sudden, I feel a lot of pressure, and then I hear the most beautiful cry I could ever hear. And baby A was out, and he was so tiny. I mean, so tiny. My babies were both around 4 pounds, and just so fragile, so beautiful, so fragile, and so tiny. And they take him over to the warmer. It is directly across from me. I'm looking at him, and he is just beautiful. I'm looking at him on that little incubator thing, and there's a black mirror type reflection on the front of the it's a panel in front of the incubator. And I'm looking at this, and I'm noticing that I can see everything going on behind the curtain in that reflection. And there's a moment of disassociation that I feel, like a really strong wave just comes over me. And I'm like, for the first time, realizing that I can see the doctor taking out my placenta, removing my organs, and taking everything out of me. And I'm seeing her preparing to take out baby B. And I'm noticing that I can see everything kind of happening. So I turn my head because at this point, like, I am not somebody who's squeamish at all. And I love anything medical. I love blood and gore. I love anything like that. But not when it's my own body. I really don't want to see that. So I look the other way, and I remember just feeling really, really hot, really nauseous and dizzy all of a sudden. And I'm feeling this pressure. And I remember the anesthesiologist and my husband were talking about the fact that the anesthesiologist's wife just had a baby. And they're talking, and all of a sudden I'm like, you guys, pay attention to me because I'm feeling a ton of pressure, more than what I felt with baby A. So I grab my husband's hand, I grab the anesthesiologist's hand, and I'm squeezing their hands, which I probably think I'm putting a lot of pressure on their hands, but in reality, I was very weak, and so I don't think I probably was. Um, but I remember just squeezing their hands, and I am trying very hard to just take deep breaths because the pressure I felt when they took baby B out, which he was above baby A and kind of to the side, so more towards up where my lungs and my liver and everything are. So all of that pressure is really pushing against me. And then they take him out, and again, the most beautiful, miraculous moment of just hearing the cry for the first time. And he is gorgeous, and I just fall in love with him. My husband leans over, takes a picture, and I didn't notice until later that the picture literally shows my incision and all of the blood and everything. And I just kind of think it's funny because I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that. I mean, I went through a C section, which almost, I almost died from. And I delivered twins. I mean, the beauty of that is just incredible, and it's a miracle in itself. So they take baby B over to the other incubator. They're both babies have teams working with them. The doctor comes over to me, the NICU doctor, and he's asking me about donor milk because I am choosing to not breastfeed at this point and still have chosen to not breastfeed my twins. I think I've done a really good job in the past with breastfeeding my three oldest children, and I've had my breasts done in 2021. So I just didn't feel the need to breastfeed. I didn't want to ruin my new boobs. I didn't want to put the pressure on myself mentally, more not so physically, but more mentally, to feed two babies and keep up with two babies and keep up my milk supply. And if I need to take supplements, that just felt like a lot because of everything that I've been through in this entire pregnancy. And I really just feel fed is best. And some may agree, some may disagree, but a fed baby, a safe baby, a happy baby, that's all that really matters. So in that moment, the doctor is speaking to me about the donor milk. We chose to use donor milk because they were premature. It was free for them to have until 37 weeks. And, we're just making all these decisions. There's a lot of information being thrown at me at once. And the doctor is talking to me, and all of a sudden I'm hot. Remember, I had talked about that a couple minutes ago. I'm feeling this hot wave just rush over my body. I'm feeling really dizzy, really nauseous. And I'm telling the anesthesiologist I don't feel good. And so he looks at me. He's asking me if I want some medicine. I'm saying, yes, please. Yes, give me the medicine. I don't care what it is. I tell the NICU doctor to stop talking. I told him to hold on. My husband is cutting the umbilical cords. I'm literally telling this doctor to stop talking to me, which I probably sounded so rude, but he's probably used to it at this point. And I am needing some medication because my body is feeling very weird and I don't like the way I'm feeling at all. I've never felt this in a C-section, and the anesthesiologist signals to the nurse. And I realized that my blood pressure is 200 over 170. I'm going to say that 200 over 170. And this is why I'm feeling this way. And all of a sudden, they're inserting medications into my IV. They're trying to keep me talking. I'm I'm kind of panicking at this point because I'm realizing that my blood pressure is like dangerously high and I'm starting to shake. And I come to find out later that I had a mini seizure during this process. They gave me some medication to stop that. Obviously, that put me at a higher risk with the magnesium sulfate, me needing that because I'm having this eclampsia episode. And that went from preeclampsia to eclampsia. And it's becoming really dangerous. So, you know, my husband kind of takes over talking to the NICU doctor. I am just terrified at this point. I'm not letting it show because, I just have my babies and I want to enjoy this moment, but I also want to make sure that I'm not going to die in the middle of it. So after the umbilical cord cutting, after they're, assessing the babies, they bring baby B over to me and he is just gorgeous. And I remember looking at him and he looked exactly how I thought he would look. He just looked perfect. And I'm giving him a kiss. They're, putting him right next to my head. I have some really beautiful pictures of that moment. They're also putting baby A in the incubator. I did not get to give him a kiss because he was having some respiratory issues and he was a lot tinier with that growth restriction than baby B. So he was in the incubator. I blow them kisses. I tell them I love them. My husband asks me if he wants, if I need him to stay with me or if he wants to go with the babies, what I want him to do. I said, just go with them. Like I'm not going to be selfish in this moment. I want him to have that time with his boys and I want to be able to just relax on the table and not have him worrying about my health. I want him to be focused on the babies. So he leaves with the nurses and goes up to the NICU. I am literally being sewn up. The doctor is talking to me. She's telling me that my placental abruption and uterine rupture, both of them, I had a placental abruption and a uterine rupture, could have cost me my life. Because what I was feeling with the cramping and the pain and the burning prior to this C-section in my perinatal appointment and on the weekend was actually my uterus rupturing, which is the overstretching of the uterine lining. And it can commonly happen in twin pregnancies or if you've had multiple C-sections, whatever. So I also learned that I had a placental abruption with baby B. So there's a lot going on in this moment, and a lot is on the line with my health and the baby's health because they're early, and because we did not have time to give them the lung steroid shot prior to delivery as it should have been administered. That 7 days, window time frame. Both babies did go into respiratory failure at different points during this time, and it was very scary, very stressful. It's a feeling that I never would wish on anybody. There was so much going on with their respiratory issues, them needing oxygen right after birth and being taken to NICU immediately, and then me, having that mini little seizure, having the uterine rupture, the placental abruption, preeclampsia, cholestasis, growth restriction, all of that, which is a lot, guys. That's a really tough pregnancy. Definitely my last. Really took a toll on me, both mentally and physically. I did end up having a partial hysterectomy during this C section to protect myself because me getting pregnant again would probably cost me my life and my baby's life if I was to ever have another baby. So we want to ensure that that's not going to happen because if I was to get pregnant again, it would be a dangerous situation for not only me, but the baby as well. And just for reference to anybody, so we did have fraternal die-die twins. And those are the most common types of twins occurring when two separate eggs are released by the ovaries and fertilized by two different sperm cells during the same menstrual cycle. So, unlike identical twins, they are not genetically identical and are essentially siblings born at the same time, sharing about 50% of their DNA rather than 100% like identical twins do. This meant that my twins both had their own amniotic sac and their own placenta. We did conceive them naturally, and I hyperovulated, which means that I released 2 eggs during my ovulation period instead of one, which is actually common and can be a genetic thing. So that was something that I learned. It does not come from the dad's side. Well, it did not in our case. I'm not sure if it does in general, but I learned that a lot of fraternal twins are the product of hyperovulation. And what a miracle it is, because prior to having these twins, we lost a couple babies. And, these are our rainbow babies, which is the term used to describe a baby who is born after a loss. And so we have two of them. But, having spontaneous fraternal twins actually only occurs within 1 to 250 pregnancies. So it's very rare, I guess. It's not very common. And so I feel very lucky to be part of the twin mom club, because it is definitely a beautiful thing. I just wanted to give a little background on exactly what kind of twins we have, because I've been asked if they're identical. And I've also been asked if we've used IUI or IVF. And the answer is yes, they are fraternal. No, they're not identical. And no, we did not use any medical intervention to have these twins. We just prayed for them, and they were spontaneously conceived through natural conception. So, going back to the rest of my story, again, I know we're kind of going back and forth, but I just want to also be able to provide some context with things that I'm talking about as well, and clarify any questions or things that people may have along the way. But anyways, I'm done with my C-section. She's, sewing me up. She explains the seriousness that, with this uterine rupture, which is about, I think it was about a couple inches long, and it was almost completely through my entire uterus. So I was beginning to bleed internally, essentially. And then the placental abruption, meaning that it detached from the uterine wall, and it was causing me to have that abdominal pain and cramping, along with the burning sensation and the lower back pain. So that was kind of a lot to take in, knowing that, if I would have went home, I could have, well, she had said I probably wouldn't have made it home because I was internally bleeding. So it was a lot to take in, knowing that I could have died if I had just stayed silent or not had spoken up or said anything. So I think that's also a really big lesson in advocating for yourself. If you feel that something's off, or if you feel that you are in pain that's not normal, speaking up for yourself, advocating for yourself, and expressing the seriousness of what you're feeling, take that as a lesson to do so, because it could be a life changing, decision to speak up. So at this point, the C section is finished. She has sewed me up, and I am very numb, very groggy, very uncomfortable. They are loading me back on to take me back to my room, and they wheel me back to my room. And here starts the checks of every 15 minutes, the nurse coming in, pushing on my stomach. And for some backstory for anybody who does not know, this is something that's common after birth. The nurses will come in, and it's almost like kneading bread. They have to push on your uterus to make sure that there's no clotting. They are pushing the blood out, and it's very painful. It's a very painful experience to have. So basically, my husband was holding my hand during this entire time. I'm holding onto the bed rail with the other hand, and every 15 minutes for the first 4 hours, they are coming in and doing this, awful experience. And so, yeah, it was not fun. It was pretty painful. I felt like I was going to pass out. And again, because I had the magnesium sulfate, I could not stand up at all. I still had the catheter in, and I was just laying in bed, not asleep, not wanting to go to sleep, just very uncomfortable. My husband was up with the babies in the NICU, and I had asked him to send me pictures, and he ended up coming down because it was just down the hallway. It wasn't very far, but it was down like a ramp. And so I had him come in. He was being very supportive. We were talking about the babies. He was showing me all these videos and pictures, and I'm a hot mess. I remember crying a lot. I remember feeling like I was robbed of an experience to hold my babies and have that skin to skin, that intimate time with my husband and my babies, and bonding experiences that are supposed to be kind of normal after birth. And I felt like I was, that experience was taken away from me because of the early delivery, the emergent C-section, the preeclampsia that turned into eclampsia, all of that. It was really hard to kind of, come to terms with right away. So I'm just laying in bed, trying to rest. They're coming in, giving me a medication. I'm on blood pressure medication. I'm on blood clotting medication. I'm having to do an injection of a shot into my stomach every day. I'm having to take all these different medications to keep me from having a seizure, having a stroke, keep me with my blood pressure, I guess, at a normal level. I'm having to take oxycodone because the pain with this C-section was excruciating. I'm assuming probably because of the uterine rupture. There was a little bit more tenderness in my scar area. And my doctor did have to do a new incision. So I have two scars now. My first scar with my first three babies is pretty much faded and it blends in with my skin. This one, I will do the work, pelvic floor exercises, the adhesion healing, and all of that to also have this scar, blend in and have my, pelvic floor strong again. But, that was kind of a lot to go through as far as like the uterine rupture. So I felt like I needed the pain medication, and I've never actually taken the pain medication with my C-sections before. I've always just, said I don't need it, or I wanted to waive taking them and I just didn't feel like I needed anything. And so with this one, knowing that I needed the oxy in order to just cope with the pain really, was a telling sign that I was in a lot of pain. And I have a very high pain tolerance. I think I've said that before. So the reality of, oh my gosh, like this is extremely, extremely painful and I'm needing some pain medication was almost kind of scary for me. And one thing I want to say too with the uterine rupture, I thought that with that there would be like severe signs that it would be, extremely painful right away. And I felt like because I hadn't had twins and hadn't had like that experience yet, although having the three pregnancies and three C-sections and being able to handle the pain without medication prior and then not being able to handle it this time made me feel a little bit like I failed. And it was kind of this, realization that, the pain was so extreme that it caused me to have to rely on medication when I've never been used to that. It just took some getting used to. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but for me, I don't like to take medicine. I don't like to rely on medication for things. So having to adjust my mindset to that was kind of something that really messed with my head. And I know a lot of people might not understand what I mean by that, but for me, it just was something that didn't go as planned. I didn't plan to have to be on blood pressure medication and blood clotting medication and an injection that was given into my stomach postpartum also daily, which was very painful post C-section. And obviously, the nurse is still pushing on my stomach. So that was something that they have to do, and that was done for the first 24 hours after birth, but it started off every 15 minutes and then every 30 minutes and then every hour and then every 3 hours. They kind of expanded that because I did hemorrhage with my third child, past a really, really large blood clot, and it was very scary. So having that history of hemorrhage, having the uterine rupture, having the placental eruption, having the everything that went wrong, it just felt a little bit more intensified with this pregnancy, and it was definitely something that had to take some getting used to and accepting the reality that things did not go as planned. So, the first 24 hours after birth, I laid in bed. I watched A&E with my husband, and I remember the magnesium made me very moody. And when the nurses would come in, to give me my medications or push on my stomach, and my husband was right there, I was very overstimulated. I think a couple times I told them to both be quiet. I told them just stop talking. I told them to turn off the TV, whatever it may be. I didn't really eat a lot within the first 24 hours. I felt really nauseous. At one point during my stay in the hospital in the maternity ward, I ended up throwing up a lot after taking some medication, and I felt really, really sick. I took a really long nap afterwards, but you know, that time just being by myself or being with just my husband and not my babies, it was a hard thing to come to terms with. And it was kind of those things where I just kind of felt like I was twiddling my thumbs and didn't really know what to do with my time because all I wanted in that moment was to be with the babies. But when that 24 hours was up at 11 p.m. the following night, so technically it was like 25 hours because I think you had to wait like an hour past because I did have to show the nurse that I could pee on my own without a catheter. They pulled the catheter out. I had to be able to show the nurse that I could stand up and walk on my own and pee on my own without any assistance. So I did that, and then my husband wheeled me up in the wheelchair up the ramp to the NICU, and I was able to go see my boys for the first time, which was so beautiful seeing them, but they were so tiny and they were in the incubators. I only stayed up there for about 45 minutes because I didn't want to overexert my energy, and I was very tired, very fragile, very weak feeling. My stomach, I had no control with my abdominal muscles at that time. And so, it just was very tiring to be moving around that much. I was able to hold the boys and have some time with them, which was incredible. It was an incredible feeling. My husband wheeled me back to my room around 12:30 that night, and I slept for a while. I tried to sleep and just focus on my water intake, focus on my rest, focus on my recovery. And then I, was able to shower first thing in the morning and go back up to see my boys, which that first shower post birth is so relaxing and refreshing, but also so painful. Bless my husband's heart. And that is also the benefit of having a good support system. He helped me shower, he helped me wash, he helped me make sure that my incision was dry, which that's really painful to stand in a shower, one day after having a C-section, especially with the uterine rupture. My stomach felt so tender, and every move that I made just felt like agony. I can't even explain it. It was so different than any experience I've had prior. So having my husband supporting me, having him helping me with everything that I needed help with was, marry somebody who is going to be there when you're recovering from birth, because that is like the real game changer. So we go back up to the NICU. I spend time with the babies. I'm able to hold them for the first time together at the same time. That picture I have, I love it. I will cherish those times and those memories for the rest of my life. Going up to the NICU on this day is where I kind of realized that both babies needed some respiratory help in order to breathe on their own. They both went into respiratory failure. They were both in respiratory distress at different times throughout this entire NICU stay, which is going on 4 weeks at this point as of this episode being recorded. But, just having that time, realizing that they are so small and that they need some extra support, having the schedule of feeding them every 3 hours on the dot. That is something that they were doing in the NICU, especially with them being premature. They cannot go more than 3 hours without eating at a time. And they both had NG feeding tubes. Those are the feeding tubes that go either through the mouth or the nose, where they insert the milk into that so it gets into their stomach. During this NICU time, they also were both under the lights for jaundice because their bilirubin levels were up pretty high. And so there was a lot of different things that I experienced this time around, because I did have an experience of my son being in the NICU when he was a baby. However, he was only in there for fluid in his lungs for about 6 days versus going on 25 or 26 days of being in the NICU with these twins. So this is something that I had not experienced so intensely as I did the first time. The NICU being the neonatal intensive care unit, for anybody who doesn't know, it's where the premature babies or babies that are newborn, having some issues after birth, they go there and they get the support they need, and then they can go home when they are ready. And there's milestones that they have to meet, especially the premature babies. We had to meet the milestones of being off oxygen and having their first bath, and which I wanted to hold off on the bath because the vernix that's on the baby's skin is really good for their immunity building. And so I wanted to wait as long as possible, which I waited about 3 weeks with both babies. But, obviously with the twins in this case, they had to both meet the milestones in order to go home, which means breathing without oxygen for 24 hours, taking full bottles, which full feeds for 24 hours. And I think there was a couple more. I just can't remember what they were. But as of this recording, only one baby is discharged from the NICU. And both are making progress. I mean, the one that is still in the NICU is making a ton of progress, but he just needs a little bit extra support. My description of a NICU stay, for anybody who has not experienced it, I wanted to try to find a way to describe it in the most realistic and accurate way while also being able to relay my emotional connection to what I've experienced. It's meeting with doctors day after day when they do their rounds, not knowing what to expect and asking all the questions, remembering to ask all the questions in hopes that your baby can go home soon. It's watching the feeding tubes get taped to their little cheeks, so small that they don't even look real yet. Cheeks softer than anything you've ever touched, skin so thin you can see the map of the blue veins underneath. It's meeting your babies for the first time with tape and adhesive on their cheeks, wondering what they'll look like without it. You learn how to hold their head steady and still while someone threads a tube through their tiny nose down into their stomach. You know that they're going to cry, they're going to hate it, and you know they cannot possibly understand that this is love. This is survival. Their cry is not loud, it's not strong, it's fragile. It's a protest that barely makes it past the tape on their cheeks. You celebrate when a tube comes out like you've just crossed the finish line, that you've won a marathon. You text people like it's a miracle, and then you swallow the lump in your throat when it has to go back in because they were too tired to finish a bottle. Too small, too premature, too exhausted from a simple act of staying alive. It's watching the oxygen go on and off, the vapotherm go on and off, hope flicker on and off. Maybe we're turning a corner. Maybe this is it. Maybe we can finally go home. And then you watch the oxygen go from 98 to 90, 82 to 70. You watch the pink leave their lips. You watch their color drain really fast. You watch their tiny chest pause. Your baby forgets to breathe. The room changes in a split second. The alarms start screaming, monitors flashing, lights flickering. Nurses are running in faster than you can process what happened. The room is moving quickly, but very controlled. Calm voices layered over urgency. And somewhere in there, you realize that you stopped breathing too. Bradycardia, a word that you learned faster than you ever wanted to. Heart rate, 150, 120, 90, 70, 60. Your hands start shaking. You're frozen. Your body goes cold. Your ears are ringing. You feel like you might collapse, but collapsing is not an option. You're staring at them and saying their name like you can get them to breathe again. Like somehow you can pull oxygen back into their lungs. Someone rubs their tiny back, flicks the bottom of their foot, adjusts the oxygen, stimulates them. You watch the saturation climb. It stalls. It climbs again. And when that sharp, desperate inhale finally comes, that tiny gasp, it feels like you came back to life too. But before you can even settle down and relax, there's another baby in the next bed. Another monitor, another set of numbers, another fragile chest. And sometimes before you can even fully recover, it happens again. And somehow all of this can happen before even lunchtime hits. You learn to live in constant chaos. You learn to live in the unpredictability of what comes next. It's learning how to adjust your life. It's learning how to sleep through the alarms, through the monitors, and trust your baby with complete strangers. Hope, fear, anxiety, and lots of tears. It's sitting in a cold chair at 2 a.m., feeling the air from the vents. It's learning to sleep through the monitors and listening to them go on and off constantly. It's waiting for the nurses to let you know if they finished a bottle. It's memorizing the heart rate ranges and oxygen saturation numbers instead of memorizing lullabies and relaxing on your couch. It's asking permission to hold your own baby, asking permission to change a diaper, remembering if they're on oxygen, you have to weigh the diaper. It's being taught how to feed your child through a tube. It's loving them through wires, through the tape, through the plastic, through the beeping machines, through incubator walls. It's wondering what their full faces look like without adhesive on their cheeks. Wondering what they'd look like asleep in a quiet room in a bassinet instead of under fluorescent lights. It's leaving every single night to go get food with empty arms, wishing that you could take them with you. Walking out of the hospital while your babies stay behind, wondering if they're going to be okay while you're gone. Driving home with a car seat that should be full. Climbing into your own bed, feeling like you've left pieces of your own body in incubators. It's trusting strangers with the most precious gifts that God has ever given to you, while praying to God that your babies make progress so you can go home soon. It's learning the routine of when to feed, how to feed, and what to feed, and what works for your baby. It's trying to sleep while knowing at any moment any monitor could scream again. It's relying on the nurses to help feed them and allowing them to do so without feeling guilty, knowing that you need sleep, knowing that you need to rest, knowing that you need to recover, but wanting so badly to do everything for your babies. And somehow, in the middle of all of that, you still show up the next morning. You wash the bottles, you wash the pacifiers, you sit by their beds, you whisper that you're here, you unintentionally wait for the monitor to drop while hoping that it stays high enough to where they can be off oxygen and be able to take a full bottle without falling asleep or forgetting to breathe. You still show up, even if you're exhausted, even if you're terrified, even when you feel like you have nothing more to give and that your energy has been depleted between two incubators. I was not prepared for the feeling of watching your baby stop breathing because it rewires you forever. It's not dramatic, it's not loud at first, but it's subtle, almost too subtle. A pause that is just a second too long. Their chest doesn't rise, their lips turn blue. The monitor starts dipping before your brain can even catch up. You stare at their ribs like you can get them to move. You whisper their name like that alone might pull oxygen back into their lungs. While time fractures, 1 second stretches into 10, it truly feels like there's a scream building in your throat, but you don't let it out because you don't want to scare them. And when the monitors are beeping and the nurses run in without saying a word, you know it's serious. When they stimulate them and they gasp, that sharp, desperate inhale feels like you just came back to life too. But the truth is that no one tells you is that your nervous system never clocks out after that. When you've watched your baby stop breathing, in my case too, your body decides that it can't afford to relax anymore. So it lives in that split second before the monitor screams mode. Even at home, in a quiet room, your ears are still straining for alarms that aren't there. Your chest tightens over nothing. You wake up in a panic just to make sure that they're still breathing. Your body learned that danger can arrive without warning, so it stays on guard. Heart racing, muscles tight, sleep shallow. It's like your fight or flight switch got flipped in the NICU and never fully flipped back. The hardest part is that you look fine. You're still smiling. You're so grateful. You feel so blessed, but underneath your nervous system is still standing at bedside, staring at a monitor, waiting for the numbers to drop. And that's really true. I mean, this whole thing is very accurate. We had to get owlet monitors because I am so used to alarms going off. I'm so used to living in that fight or flight mode and having that safety of a monitor being on their foot. So I had to buy the owlet monitors to even feel normal. And like I said, as of this episode, only one baby has been discharged. I've came home briefly just to spend somewhat of a normal couple days at home out of the hospital, which in reality doesn't even feel normal to me. It feels very foreign. I feel like a piece of my heart is still an hour and a half away. I feel like I should still be there, but I also feel like I should take care of myself and the baby I do have home and kind of get into a normal routine. But truthfully, watching your babies go through such a emotional and intense time, it changes you in a way that you don't expect. And this entire experience has forced me to slow down in a way that I didn't know I needed to slow down. It has forced me to realize the precious gift of life and the fact that even watching my babies stay above 90 in their saturation for their oxygen on the monitors, that alone feels like a huge win because of everything that we have experienced so far. And yet, in the middle of all of this chaos, there is something so powerful. The way that they grip your finger, the way that they settle when they hear your voice, the way that their tiny bodies fight so fiercely to stay here. Being a mom experiencing the NICU motherhood is so raw. It's relentless, it's holy, it stretches you past what you thought you could ever survive. It's fear, anxiety, stress, love, hopelessness, and then finding hope and praying through it. Somehow, through the alarms, through the oxygen, the tubes, everything, your love grows louder than all of that. A lot of the NICU stay has been very, very scary for me and our family. Baby A, our baby B, both respiratory failure, respiratory distress, and then the jaundice that happened for both of the twins. And then our twin A has been on oxygen, on off oxygens for most of the time that he's been here. It's been a lot, sitting in a hospital room watching out the window just because you're bored, eating hospital food or having to go through a drive-through because you're so tired of hospital food that you can't stand it. I had to rely on my family to drive me around for 2 weeks because I couldn't drive. They require you to wait 2 weeks or 14 days post C section to drive a vehicle because of the pressure and the quick movements that could happen and rip your scar or cause you to bleed internally. So, having to rely on family and then finally being able to drive on my own to go get food because I was so sick of eating hospital food. It's also having uncontrollable headaches because you have eclampsia, preeclampsia, and, feeling uncomfortable because you're sleeping on couches that feel cold, recliners that feel sterile, and listening to monitors constantly. And I'm sure that for any mom who's been through this, that you can understand. And it's a journey. It's a journey that's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the weak. And it really does strengthen you in a way that you never could have imagined. It brings out this incredible fierceness that you didn't even know that you had. But you have to stay strong for your babies so you don't get to break. And if you do, I'm sure it's going to be in the NICU shower where you've held your tears in long enough just so that no one can hear you. I watched my baby's circumcisions. I was there for them through every procedure that I was able to be there for. And I've been there through all the NG tube replacements. And it's hard. It's definitely hard to watch your baby stop breathing. It's definitely hard to watch the nurses come in. It's definitely hard to watch your baby get poked and know that they need the testing done, but still hard to watch. It's difficult to hold yourself together for everything, trying to hold it together for them and being able to take care of yourself while also recovering from a major abdominal surgery. And how do you do that? I have 3 other kids at home, so I just can't forget about them either. I have family that's helping me and a great support system because raising children and going through difficult situations does take a village. And for me, someone who doesn't like to ask for help, someone who thinks that I can do everything independently, I learned through this entire experience that I cannot do everything by myself and I do need help. I FaceTimed my kids as much as possible, calling them as much as possible, sending pictures to their school so that they feel included and they can show their friends and their teachers. And while it's all very stressful doing this postpartum while still healing from my C section and partial hysterectomy, it's been almost empowering to be able to see the strength that I have that I didn't know I had. And let's not forget about navigating the hormonal shifts that come with postpartum along with doing it in the NICU, basically living in the hospital. As of this recording, still, just a brief update, one baby still has not came home from the NICU, so that makes pretty much a month in the NICU. And, having to come to terms with the fact that my birth plan that I wrote, that I talked about at the beginning, which was like 2.5 pages long, by the way, very detailed, was something that I did not get to experience as my last pregnancy. And although I'm very grateful for the care that I've received and the urgency of delivering them safely, there was a little piece of grief in me that I didn't get to experience what I truly wanted in the end of this pregnancy. I had my 2.5 page birth plan ready to go. I had the placentas that I was going to turn into the capsules for postpartum because I had done extensive research on the nutritional value that comes with that, the energy, the hormonal, the lessening of postpartum depression and anxiety and things like that. And I've really shifted in my life into a holistic and more natural functional medicine way of living. And so that was something that I really wanted to do. However, I did not get to do that because of the placental abruption, because of the urgency of my pregnancy, because of everything that went wrong in the end of my pregnancy. It just was not feasible for them to be able to, give me my placentas to then therefore pay someone to turn them into capsules for postpartum healing. And that took me a little bit of a time to accept that. And so it's okay. I'm going to just, accept what is and move forward. There are a lot of other ways I can incorporate holistic or functional ways of healing naturally through postpartum into my pregnancy and postpartum care, which is what I'm just focused on doing now. Again, I'm thankful for the doctors. I'm thankful for them catching everything, listening to me, and being, me being able to be alive today to be with my babies. There's also the fact that I wanted to do skin to skin right after birth, and that's something that I did not get to experience because obviously I couldn't see my babies for 24 hours after birth, and that took a toll on me. I've talked about it in a way that I didn't really realize until after everything was said and done. I missed and I craved that moment that I could have had with them right after birth. Just having this whole plan perfectly played out and planned out in my mind, and then not getting able to experience what I wanted in my birth plan was a little bit of like a hitting me with a brick wall of grief. It just kind of took me a minute to gather my thoughts and realize that number one, I almost died. I could have lost my babies. And also realizing that I am thankful enough and lucky enough to be here. So, not taking things for granted or not being upset with the way things went. But I also did feel a little bit of anger, not with the doctors, not with the hospital, not with my husband, not with anybody else, just with my body, because I felt like my body kind of failed me. The next part of this podcast, I am going to be really raw and vulnerable. I was angry at my body. That's it. That's something I really haven't said out loud until just this moment. Let me explain. And before I get to that explanation, let me just say that this is not going to be a very clean cut segment. This is raw, real. When my C section was over, when I was back in my room, when the surgery was done, when my babies were in the NICU and everything was silent, when it was just me in a cold, dark room, I was angry. Not at the doctors, not at the hospital, not even at the situation, not my husband, not my family, not my friends, nobody else. I was angry at my body. And that almost feels illegal and wrong to say and admit as a mom because I'm so blessed to have not one, but two more babies. And I'm so thankful for my body for carrying these babies, even though it was a really difficult and roller coaster of a ride. I'm thankful that I'm alive to see them. I'm thankful that I have the chance to be able to have more children after not thinking that I could have any more. But, we're supposed to say that we are thankful for our bodies, for our babies, for the beauty of creating life. And I am very thankful for that. I'm extremely thankful for that. But no one talks about being angry or feeling resentful that things didn't go your way during birth or pregnancy. Maybe not enjoying your pregnancy because you're so miserable or sick, or maybe it's just really hard on your body. And I know I've talked about this a little bit, but in a way, I'm angry at my body failing me. It failed under pressure. My blood pressure climbed, my scar burned, my uterus ruptured, my placenta tore. My pregnancy became unsafe and life threatening to the point where I could have passed away. And I had this quiet, ugly thought: why couldn't I just hold it together? Why couldn't my body just be stronger? Why couldn't I just carry them a little bit longer so they wouldn't have to be in the NICU for so long? Why couldn't this just be a normal pregnancy? Why couldn't I just wait a few more days, well, like a week, until my scheduled C section? Why does everything have to be so complicated in this moment? Those are my thoughts during this time of being alone in the maternity ward, feeling betrayed by my own body, feeling like I'm grieving an experience that I didn't get to have. And I know that probably sounds pretty selfish in the moment, but it's not meant to be selfish. It's meant to be honest. I'm very thankful. I'm very blessed. I know that I am very lucky to have two more babies to love. God chose me to be a twin mom, and I don't know why, but I feel very blessed to have this experience. And I have 5 children now, and I think that's beautiful. But I also feel a little resentful at the fact that my last pregnancy was not the picture perfect ideal pregnancy. It was full of complications and hospital stays and constant monitoring and constant appointments and lots of drive time. And it resulted in me almost losing my life and having to have an emergency C-section. And that's a lot to take in. That's a lot to process. That's a lot to, accept in terms of things could have went so wrong. Not saying that I'm thinking that way, but things could have went so incredibly the opposite way, and yet they still went through a difficult period of having to adjust, having to be away from my husband, not seeing my husband for almost 3 weeks, You know, being away from my kids, not seeing my kids for 3 weeks, missing school things, missing homework time, missing nighttime bed routines, missing all of these things that have a grief that follows with that you just don't expect unless you're in the situation. This kind of brings me to a different topic that I didn't think I was going to talk about, but I'm going to touch on it because I think that since I'm being honest and vulnerable and raw and real, I'm just going to go for it. You know, the trauma of my birth, the trauma of everything, the chaotic, mess that it was. What about the quiet aftermath? I haven't seen my husband up until a couple days ago, and it's been in passing. Like before that, it was just kind of in passing. And so, he is saving his paternity time until I get home, which I can handle being in the hospital. There's really nothing to do. But, something that nobody really tells you about the high risk pregnancy and the life in the NICU is that you can be married and still feel completely alone. And, in general, I don't know any marriage that hasn't had its ups and downs to where you feel kind of isolated or lonely in certain points of your marriage. But, not seeing my husband for that amount of time while also being postpartum and trying to navigate those emotions and the emotions of being in the NICU and everything that comes with that is kind of isolating and lonely because, even though we talk every day, even though we have conversations all the time, the quality time that we spent together was me in a hospital bed while a nurse pressed on my stomach to make sure I didn't have blood clotting. I haven't spent any time with him as far as seeing him in the way that matters, not sitting across from him without machines beeping, not talking without feeling exhausted, not having, that feeling of being a wife or a mother, just a medical co captain in survival mode right now. Life in the NICU has made us more of logistic partners and shift traders, report exchangers rather than husband and wife. Our conversations changed from how was your day, how was work, to how is the baby's oxygen, did their feeds increase, did they have wet diapers, what questions do we have for the doctors, did you eat, did you sleep, how are you feeling? Somewhere in there, that softness disappears. That's the part that nobody really prepares you for. High risk pregnancy and postpartum NICU life doesn't test your body. It also tests your marriage because when you're both very scared, both very tired, both grieving the version of birth that you thought you'd have instead of being in the NICU for almost a month, there's no extra energy left to reassure each other or have those conversations that just feel natural and flow. We go from all of these fun conversations and dinners and hanging out with each other to being concerned about baby A and baby B continuing to breathe on their own without oxygen or having problems with their feeding. All of that really takes a toll because when you're both in that moment, the relationship that I didn't expect to fracture almost feels fractured, even if it's not, because there's so much distance between us, but there's so much of a powerful intimacy that's so emotional and real between us that we've grown so close emotionally, but physically we're so distant because I'm, almost 2 hours away and he is back home keeping everything together. And there's so many things that take priority over date nights or, hey, how was your day? And I finally admitted that I was overwhelmed when I said, I need a minute just to talk to you and be present. I need a minute to come home and just spend a few hours, which was a day and a half. But to reset my nervous system instead of sitting in the NICU chair days and hours upon end. And I'm going to be honest, I felt really selfish for even admitting that out loud. But again, that's where support comes in. My mother in law has been an angel on earth because she has came up and stayed with the baby that's still in the NICU so that I didn't feel like I was abandoning my baby. I felt selfish for needing space, selfish for wanting sleep, selfish for protecting my sanity, selfish for even spending time with my other 3 children as if a good mother doesn't have limits, as if strong women don't need breaks. But the truth is that I'm starting to understand that if I abandon myself to prove my worth, to prove that I'm strong, I will end up resenting everyone I'm trying to love. And that includes my husband. That includes my babies, my children, the woman that I am, the woman that I have to live with when the adrenaline and cortisol fade. So maybe that's the part of the story that isn't about premature twins or a traumatic birth. Maybe it's learning that prioritizing my mental health is not selfish. It's a stabilization factor because if I don't take care of my nervous system in the way that I need, because I just survived a trauma and I'm going through a lonely, very awkward period, both lonely and awkward, it will show up in my marriage. It will show up in my parenting. It will show up in my relationships. It will show up in my tone of voice, my patience, my resentment. Why do we as moms feel guilty for taking space in our own healing as mothers and as women? I went from feeling selfish for leaving my older kids to selfish for leaving my new babies. Both deserve my attention. Both deserve my love and my presence. But so does my marriage, and so does myself. And the recovery, my marriage, the identity shift that comes with being a new mom, the unfolding of a new chapter is really important to normalize. And it's not always going to be pretty and clean cut. It's not always going to be polished. My husband and I went from standing side by side in the NICU room, exchanging updates over bassinets and coordinating who has who. And we've taken turns being strong. He's been there for me in ways that I can't even comprehend or describe. But, that doesn't mean that we won't get back to where we do have the date nights and we do have the conversations of how was your day. And, this quietly tests your marriage, it tests your sanity, it tests your patience. I felt like I was neglecting my marriage, my children, and sometimes even if my husband and I were in the same room, I felt isolated. One thing that I learned through this is that research shows that prolonged time in the hospital, prolonged time in medical stress, especially around premature birth, increases anxiety, emotional withdrawal, irritability, and even resentment in relationships and marriages, which is why we, you know, nothing you say after 8 o'clock at night, which I learned from my cousin who is also a twin mom, nothing you say after 8 p.m. matters, because that you're going to get frustrated. That anxiety, that fear, that resentment is going to creep in. Not because the love is gone, not because the relationship is failing, but because the nervous system is so overloaded and there's so much going on that it truly doesn't matter in that moment. Two dysregulated people cannot co-regulate each other very well. So when you add in the sleep deprivation, fear, hospital, the lighting of the hospital, the fluorescent lights, alarms, financial pressure, constant unknown, intimacy becomes survival coordination. You love each other, yeah, but you're both exhausted versions of yourselves. And then the other layer that I did not expect. When I finally admitted that I was overwhelmed, when I went home for the couple days to reset my mind and my body, when I say I need the sleep or I need to clear my head, that feeling of selfishness really set in deep for me, even though I didn't say it aloud. And that's where I started questioning, why, as women, do we internalize the belief that if we're not running ourselves into the ground, then we are failing everybody else around us? Because somewhere along the line, we were taught that self sacrifice and abandoning our own needs equals love. However, what I'm learning in real time is that if I abandon myself to prove that I'm devoted to my husband, to my children, to my in-laws, to my parents, to whoever, I will eventually resent the people who I'm trying to rely on for that help. And that is not a good thing to do. If I ignore my mental health, my nervous system will speak for me. It will show up in my tone, my attitude, my distance, my frustration, and my marriage, like I said before. And I always say, put your marriage, put your relationship above your children, because if you and your partner, whoever you're with, are not in a good place, then the children are going to feel that. And that's something that I try to stay really true to in my marriage with my husband, because he comes before them, because I want him and I to set a good example and him and I to be on the same page and the same team. If we're not in tune with each other, that's going to come out in how we communicate with the children, how we communicate with each other, how we set the tone for the house, and how we model behavior for each other and our children. This experience has magnified pretty much everything that already exists in the relationship, our strengths, our cracks, and maybe the bravest thing that we can do is stop pretending that everything's fine when we're not. And that maybe goes more for me. And I'm kind of laughing because one of my things that I always say, and my mother-in-law kind of reminds me of this all the time, and I know she's going to listen to this and laugh, is whenever something is wrong and somebody asks me how I'm doing, I say I'm fine. Maybe it's time I stop saying I'm fine and stop asking and relying on people for that help. Maybe it's time to say that this is really hard and it sucks. This is changing who I am in the moment, because I have to learn how to navigate all of these difficult situations. And as a new mom of 5, not new mom in general, new mom of now going from 3 to 5 children, I have to learn how to come back to my husband, how to come back to my children after everything that I've went through. And that might be the most sacred work of all. So as of right now, since I'm recording in segments, I am still in the NICU with my babies, going on a month of being here. We are definitely getting closer, as our baby that is still in the NICU is making progress pretty quickly, and we should be able to go home pretty soon. I do still have eclampsia. Well, not eclampsia. I'm back to having preeclampsia, I guess. I don't really know how that works, but I am still having blood pressure issues because I'm still having to be on my blood pressure medication, which hopefully I'm going to get off of this week. So that is a positive, and manifesting the energy to be home with both babies, both healthy babies. That is something that I'm really hoping for, you know, and this whole situation, you know, even through all of the rough times, it truly feels like I have had the chance to finally have the family I've always dreamed of after having everything, you know, torn out from beneath us with things that we've went through, everything that we've walked through, the hardest chapters that we've experienced somehow were meant to shape us and prepare us for this exact moment. Like every loss, every detour, every heartache was part of a bigger story unfolding exactly the way that it was meant to be, even if we didn't prepare for it, even if it didn't go as planned. I truly feel like the best gifts in life are unexpected. They teach you the most valuable lessons, and they slow you down to see what really is important. And these two boys have filled the void in my heart that I never even knew existed. My husband and I have grown closer than we've ever been before, and it's strengthened and, created a family that we never even knew that we needed. I said earlier that this entire experience has forced me to slow down in a way that I didn't know I needed to. And I need to take a moment to thank my family and everyone who has been checked in and been there for me. Thank you for being there and stepping in, even though it was probably inconvenient at times, even though it wasn't the plan that we, created. And, it really does take a village. I said that earlier and I mean it. I am so hyper independent and so I can do things on my own that I think it's a nice reminder to be able to slow down and rely on everybody else to help jump in. It's a nice reminder to be able to remind myself to be patient, enjoying the little moments, taking time to just rest and be myself, be at peace, be sitting in a quiet room, even though there's monitors beeping, even though there's nurses coming in and out. Being able to just sit and be with my babies is so beautiful. One thing that I always say is that when you make plans, God laughs because he has a bigger plan for you. And his plan was definitely to teach me to slow down. I found, how to sit in a room by myself and be in my thoughts without a TV, with only my phone and a Hulu app on it. Um, to just sit and reflect on everything that I've been through. I found the patience that I needed to find. I found the rest that I so desperately needed, even if it was on a not so comfortable hospital couch. I'm not rushing myself to clean my house like a million times a day, how I always do. I'm focused on healing and resting and just enjoying my babies and taking the time for myself and trying to eat clean, trying to get some sunshine every day, even if it's just walking from the hospital to my car. Taking the time, even if it's hour by hour or minute by minute sometimes, taking that time for myself and really reflecting on what's important in my life and where my life is going. Because me having my first baby in my early 20s versus me having my last two babies in my mid 30s, my mindset and my energy has really shifted. And I truly think that it was meant for me to have this kind of experience, even though it was a chaotic shift in what I had planned, because it forced me to slow down and stop, pay more attention to what I have, not what I want, focus on what I have, not what I wish I had. I also really had to slow down in order to keep my blood pressure at a safe number. So I've had to go in for weekly blood pressure monitoring and, having to make sure that I'm still healthy. So it's also forced me to really focus on my health, both physical and mental and emotional, I guess, too. But, you know, going from my blood pressure sitting at 200 over 170 to 122 over 85, that's definitely an improvement. We are not ending this episode soft. We are not ending this episode very abruptly. We are ending it honest, earned, and grounded. I walked into that hospital, pregnant with twins, with a 2.5-page birth plan and this illusion that if I was prepared enough, researched enough, prayed enough, that I could control the ending. Control is an illusion. We go through our entire lives planning and wanting and wishing that things were different or things that went our way. But that is the fact, is that control is an illusion. We have no control. Our bodies, our lives play out in the way that they are supposed to, not the way that we want them to. I walked out a surgical patient, a NICU mother, a woman whose blood pressure reached dangerous levels, a woman whose uterus tore, a woman who was not able to see her babies for the first 24 hours of their life, a woman who was forced to rely on everybody else to help her, even though she didn't really want that because she wanted to do it on her own. A new mom who stood over 2 incubators and memorized monitors instead of memorizing the TV shows she was going to binge watch while on maternity leave. The truth is that somewhere between the alarms, between the magnesium, the shaking, the bradycardiac events, the respiratory failure, blue lips, phantom beeps in my own bed, the grief of a partial hysterectomy, the anger at my body, the distance in my marriage, and the surrender of control, I changed. Not in the cute aesthetic motherhood glow way, in the stripped down survival way, in the way where you realize that your body is not invincible. Your plans are not promises, and your control was never the thing holding your world together. Love was the thing that held it together. Love was the thing that held me on that operating table. Love was the thing that made my husband squeeze my hand when I was thinking that I was going to die. Love was the thing that made my babies fight so hard to breathe. Love was the thing that kept me walking those hospital hallways where my incision burned and my hormones crashed. Love was the thing that kept me asking questions and doing my research, even when my voice shook and my fears doubted everything. I thought strength looked like holding it all together. I've always thought that strength looks like holding it all together. Now I know that it looks like surrender in very vulnerable emotional moments. It looks like saying, I need some help, or I'm scared, or I'm not sure how to feel or go through this. It looks like admitting I was angry at my own body. It looks like letting go of the birth I didn't get. It looks like sitting in grief and gratitude at the same time, because here's the truth. You can sit in grief and gratitude at the same time. I almost died. My babies struggled to breathe. My body failed me in ways that I never expected. Maybe that's the point. This experience has humbled me in ways that I never knew or expected. And yet, here we are. Here I am. And maybe that's the lesson. It's not about having a perfect birth or a laid out birth plan. It's not about thinking you can do it all on your own. Maybe it's about realizing that life is fragile, motherhood is humbling, control is an illusion, and resilience is built in the moments where you think you cannot survive, but you still do. This was not the birth story I planned, but it was the one that broke me open. And in that breaking, I found something stronger than control. I found surrender, perspective, gratitude that feels different now, heavier, deeper, and real, and a peace that I never even knew existed. Every time I look at my twins, I don't see monitors. I see miracles that came through chaos, that survived the almost impossible. I see proof that even when everything looks like it's falling apart, it's not. Life can still rise. And if you're experiencing your own journey of whether it's a NICU season, a pregnancy season, or just a season of change, if your birth didn't go the way you wanted, if your body feels like it's betraying you, if your marriage feels like it's surviving instead of thriving, you're not dramatic, you're not failing, you're living through something that reshapes you. It is a season, and it's temporary. One day when the alarms stop echoing in your head, when the scar fades from angry red to soft silver, when the fear loosens its grip, you'll realize that you survived something super sacred. This wasn't just the birth of my twins. For me, it was the birth of a version of me who understands that control was never the goal. Resilience was. So tonight, when I'm going back into the NICU to sit with my miracle babies, who have no idea how much they've already taught me, I'm going to remember that control is just an illusion and that life gives you what you can handle, even if you think you can't get through it. I see proof that even in chaos, survival still shows up, strength still rises. We survived. That survival changed us in ways that comfort never could. As I was getting ready to close out this episode, I just wanted to jump on and explain something really quick. When I discussed how both babies kind of quit breathing and forgot to breathe and kind of talked about their oxygen and heart rates dropping, I just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit more in detail because, you know, it's hard to understand, I guess, or, how can you forget to breathe? When babies are born prematurely and have growth restriction, especially with growth restriction, which we had the growth restriction in baby A. Their bodies are using energy to simply exist. Their lungs are immature and their nervous system is not fully developed. So, that part of the brain that tells them to breathe and to keep breathing is not always reliable yet. Preemies fatigue in a way that full term babies do not. They burn calories trying to maintain their temperature. They burn calories trying to coordinate suck, swallow, and breathe. They burn calories just trying to keep their heart rate and oxygen stable. And when they run out of that energy, the first thing that goes is the breathing. It's called apnea of prematurity. It sounds clinical, almost harmless when you say it that way, but what it really means is your baby forgets to breathe. And that's exactly what happens again and again and again with our baby A, the one that's still in the hospital. He had another episode. His heart rate dropped, his oxygen dropped, and I watched that familiar shift that kind of haunts me in the middle of the night come back, where his oxygen was steady, but then started to slide backwards. This actually ended up happening when my mother in law was there as well. And instead of it happening during feeding time, which when it was usually happening, it happened when he was just laying in his crib. And if we're being truly honest, there is no amount of medical explanation that prepares you for something like this. You can understand anatomy, you can understand science, you can understand the terms that are being used when the doctor is explaining to you what's going on with your baby's health, but nothing truly prepares you for the exact moment that you watch your baby stop breathing. The raw, honest truth is that your body doesn't hear immature respiratory drive. Your body hears your baby is slipping, and you stand there trying not to panic because everybody else in the room is calm. You try to match the nurse's tone, you try to be rational. But the truth is, as their mom, I stand there feeling helpless. I can't breathe for them. I can't lend them my lungs. I can only stand up and whisper that I love them and I believe that they will be okay. And then they both were. And baby A, he's doing better. And that's when everyone can kind of exhale and relax. The numbers climb back up and the room settles down. Because even when the episode ends, the fear lingers in your muscles, in your jaw, in your sleep. That's what prematurity fatigue looks like. It's science, it's neurology, it's oxygen saturation and brainstem immaturity. And it's also a mother standing in a hospital room bargaining with God while pretending she understands the monitor. I know we talked about control being an illusion, and I used to think that strength looked like control. Having the birth plan, knowing the timeline, walking out of the hospital with two babies in matching outfits and a neat little story to tell. But strength is standing in the NICU while alarms are screaming and pretending your hands are not shaking, watching the numbers fall and refusing to fall apart with them, going home with your other babies with milk leaking through your shirt because your milk came in and you're in a ton of pain. There's nothing to do to dry it up at this moment. It's bleeding through pants in the middle of a store while frantically looking for the right formula to buy. Strength is loving something so deeply that it could break you and choosing to love it anyways. I've never felt smaller in my life, and I've never felt more powerful. Because when your baby forgets to breathe, when you're going to the NICU, wondering if you're going to go home the next day, you understand something most people never will. Life is not fragile in the way that we think it is. It's ferocious. It fights, it gasps, it comes back, and so do we. This story did not go the way that I planned. It was terrifying, scary, loud, but more humbling than I ever could have imagined. This entire experience, like I said before, it has taught me so much. Not the curated version of motherhood that I thought I would be going home to. Not the strong on social media version. And, I think it's really easy to turn away or be scared, be frustrated. But we are human. We are not weak for being afraid. We are not weak for shaking. We are not weak for crying in hospital bathrooms where no one can hear us. I walked out of surgery with my abdomen stitched together, layers of muscles cut and pulled apart to bring my sons into this world. I stood up the next day with an incision that burned and pulled so bad I could barely even stand straight, bleeding in ways that no one really prepares you for. I vacuumed my car and walked through Target 4 days after birth like I was fine, only to go home and feel my body remind me that I probably should not have done that. And that's when I decided I needed to rest, and that's when the lessons really started being learned. Healing is not pretty. It's swelling, soreness, blood pooling and wondering if it's too much, your husband holding your hand and helping you get off the toilet. It's sitting down too fast and feeling your scar sting, being so engorged that every shirt you wear gets soaking wet, no matter how many ice packs or cabbage leaves that you put on your boobs in hopes that they'll dry out. Ironically, in the middle of all of this, I learned that we have the strongest, most incredible support system of family and friends. Even though our circle is small, it's real. I saw my husband and I grow close in a way that we never have before. Not because it was easy, not because we didn't struggle, but because everything else was stripped away: pride, ego, control, comfort. What was left was us. Two exhausted parents, two terrified people, two humans who could have turned away from each other in the chaos. But we didn't. We leaned on each other. And there's something about watching your child fight for breath that makes petty arguments feel small. There's something about sitting side by side at 3 a.m. while the nurse presses on your stomach and your husband is letting you squeeze his hand as hard as you can because he doesn't know it, or maybe he does. But in that moment and in every moment, I need him so much. It's strengthened our marriage, our family. In the end, it's not about the fancy Facebook posts or the endless selfies of I love you, happy anniversary, happy birthday. It's not the perfect communication. It's not curated happiness. It's holding hands while a monitor alarm screams, locking eyes when the numbers drop, silently agreeing that we are in this together. All in all, it's taught me that the most intense love stories are not the ones that look perfect, not the ones that shine on social media. They're the ones that survive through the chaos, through the struggles, silently, behind closed doors, together. I used to pray for everything that I have now. I remember sitting in my room after my divorce with my first marriage, after surviving unimaginable trauma, and praying for God to send me my soulmate, someone who I could lean on in the toughest of times. I prayed for my family to be complete, and He definitely delivered on that promise. Not in my time, not the perfectly curated version of what I wanted, but in His time with His lessons, so I could learn exactly who and where I needed to be in this moment right now. So, with that being said, thank you for listening to my story, and I will see you later.